Hello and welcome to the Branching Paths podcast. I'm here today with Kris Russell, a transformational integration coach who works with high performers through states of awakening. So, Kris, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all for having me,
Hmm.
Daniel. I focus in two different areas. Number one, I work with people that are undergoing psychedelic assisted therapy or working with psychedelics in a sacred way to help them prepare for those experiences and then help them integrate them afterward. I also work with that same population of what I call high performers, which we'll talk about maybe more later, defining what that is, but just helping them navigate big transitions in life. Maybe there's been some kind of an awakening event. Maybe it was through some big suffering like a crisis or a divorce or a grief or something along those lines, but really helping them make the most of that experience so that they can transform their lives in the way that feels most important to them.
Hmm. I'd love to start with your own transformation. You wrote on your website that you had a bit of a turning point in your life. So, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I've had probably several turning points as most of us have, but we don't notice it while we're
That's
while
fair.
we're going through them.
Hmm.
Um, The most important was likely in 2018. I had a severe concussion, which resulted in post-concussion syndrome and some pretty traumatic, devastating almost impacts to my life. I lost the vision in my right eye for several months. I couldn't drive. I was dealing with severe panic attacks, anxiety. I thought at one point that I was going to even take my own life. And this lasted for the better part of 2 years. I was still working and needing to provide for my family. And it was just a very tumultuous time. And I wouldn't have known it at the time, but that was one of the greatest gifts that I've ever been given because it forced me to really pause and begin to take things in my life more seriously that I had neglected. It was really what started my healing journey. Yeah, happy to talk more about it, but that's the brief point.
Absolutely. What were some of the reflections that came to you in this unintentional period, this unintentional pause?
Yeah, that's a great question. During the period itself, what came to me during the period, I think most of what really came to me that was enlightening was um, after the fact. There was a point where it just felt almost like drowning, where there's just so much happening and so much new and so many, at the time, what felt like very unwelcome circumstances that it was really difficult to really get much, to see much positive from it. But after the fact, I was working with a therapist at one point. He recommended that I start meditating in order to just find some peace and some clarity and some stillness. I really wasn't interested in any of the medications that were being kind of pitched at me to help deal with these symptoms. And the meditation became a very powerful practice, and that was a became a big anchor that's still a part of my life today. I also, due to meditation, started studying Buddhism and practicing Buddhism, which became a very important part of my life and still is in many ways, although I branched out into some other practices. But really, in the tradition that I'm most aligned with, they say that sometimes the ego is so strong that the universe has to manifest itself in an almost a wrathful way to get our attention. And that was definitely my experience. I don't think that if this something at this magnitude, if that had not have happened to me, that I don't think I would have woken up in the same way. I would still be going down many of these old paths that were no longer serving me. And so now I'm certainly able to look back with an enormous amount of gratitude. Yeah.
Mm. The universe had to break up the megaphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you
Mhm.
mentioned your path's no longer serving you. This is actually something I'm very interested in touching on in this you described yourself as somebody that not necessarily had it all, but success, success in your career. So tell me a little bit about where you think the path would have led you without this crisis life, and was what were some challenges that you feel in that space?
Ah, hmm. So much to unpack there. Looking back now, I can see that so much of what I was doing, the way that I was working, the way that what I was being was due to looking for some kind of external validation, something
Mm,
outside of myself to say, you're enough, you're going to be okay, you're worthy. All of these things that we ultimately can only find within ourselves. But at the time, I didn't know that. And I was putting everything I had into building a career, into being successful, into being um, thinking that I was making myself worthy of what the world, whatever that meant to me at the time, looked like, so that I was somehow good enough. And I think I would have continued to pursue that path, which is ultimately one that is empty. I realize too now that for a long time, I had these almost resentments towards my old career or towards the field that I was in. And I, I recognize now that there was nothing wrong with the career. There was nothing wrong with the field. There was nothing wrong with what I was doing. It was the way that I was doing it and the reasons why I was doing it. I was doing it because I wanted to find something outside of myself that could make me happy, or that could fill what some people say is a God-shaped hole, so to speak. And you can't fill a God-shaped hole with anything but something that's already inside of you. And yeah, I just would have continued on that path and would have continued building and growing and doing, but remained spiritually very empty.
I'm really glad that you gave the caveat that it was the intention behind the work and not the work itself. It's one of
Hmm.
the things that can be a little bit challenging or that can come up in, say, a space of plant medicines, spirituality, this sort of thing. Sometimes there can be a resentment in general towards, high performance careers, finance, etc. And I love that you have managed to bridge the gap by saying, no, it's not the career itself. It's the reason for doing it. I'd like to ask you, I know that psychedelics factored into this journey somewhere along the way. So where do they come in this story?
Hmm. Yeah, well, fast forward to 2021, I had hired a coach to help me navigate a big career shift because I knew I wanted out, but I didn't know what to do with this energy. I'd kind of built my whole identity around this character that I had created. And my coach, along with just doing a lot of great work with me, helped me to find plant medicine for the first time. And that really just began to shift things in a way that I never thought possible. I joked that I'd lived most of the first 35, 36 years of my life completely in my head. Even though I was practicing Buddhism and meditating, it was all very intellectual. And it wasn't until psychedelics came into my life that I had the first experience of something deeper, something from the heart. And that heart space really became what's now the cornerstone of my life and certainly of my spiritual practice is this idea of really listening to and leading from the heart. Yeah.
Hmm. Are there any patterns that you notice as you work with people in these states of awakening?
Yeah. Well, I think this could be said of all of us. It's just with the clients that I work with, but I think most of us are. at some point in our journey, in the soul's journey, are looking for external validation. We're looking something for something outside of us to tell us that we're enough, to tell us that we're okay, to tell us that we're worthy. And for whatever reason, there's a myriad of reasons we come to that point. I think that many of them point to our core wounds of abandonment or rejection or injustice or any of these other core wounds. So the common thread seems to be this idea of realizing that no matter how much I make, what title I have, whatever I do, even what we would say more positive things like the success in my family or whatever that looks like, I'm not going to be able to, it's never going to be enough. It's there, it's a, it's a treadmill, so to speak. And so we're looking in the wrong place. And there's this idea of a realization that what I was chasing, no matter how much I get it, is not going to do it. And there's almost an ache or an anguish that comes along with that. I think sometimes we don't recognize the reality of some grief, some maybe necessary grief that comes with that. That, oh, what I'm chasing, even if I get it, even if I get more of it, even if I get the best of it, even if I get all of it, is still going to leave me feeling empty and hollow ultimately. There's a needed period of grief for that and a recognition of the time and energy and investment emotionally, financially, whatever it is, time that we've made in constructing something that will no longer serve us in the way that we thought it was going to. So, yeah, I think it's that realization that whatever I do is not going to be enough as long as it's outside. And then the grief associated with that and not knowing then what to do, where to go from there. Where do we take this? How do I take this grief and turn it into something meaningful and lasting and impactful and something that will actually slake my this inner thirst? Yeah.
When you had your crisis, and you now had to navigate your way out of this, and I suppose I could ask it in this way as well. What purpose does money and career serve for you now, now that there's been this shift?
Mm, great questions. Yeah. Well, there's not one easy answer, but the simplest answer is that I realized that I no longer wanted to move forward with the career that I was in. I was in a consulting, business consulting, public accounting kind of a space, and I was able to resign from that work. I underwent some very intense coach training um, through an organization called the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, and eventually some other very more special training through for psychedelic integration practice. Uh, but it was a slow transition and one with several steps. I quit my corporate job. I opened my own business consulting practice so that I could pay the bills while I was under becoming a coach and learning these other skills. I eventually shut down that consulting practice in April of 2024 so that I could pivot exclusively to coaching. And that's what my work is revolving around now is growing my own coaching practice. And I also am a contract coach for some organizations that cater towards many of those people that I used to look like, whether it was CPAs or finance professionals, but people who are um, looking to build different skills in their careers, whether it's leadership or things along with like executive presence and things like that. And we often start there, but the great part of it is that even in those contract opportunities, we often get to go much deeper into what's really important for people. So I'll pause there for a second. Am I answering your question?
You are, yes. Yes, thank you. I'd like to go even deeper into that actually and ask, so not just for yourself, but there is sometimes such a disconnect, it seems, between, say, the corporate world and this world of plant medicine, spirituality, etc. Do you see a compassionate path forward, like a bridge between those two worlds, where we can learn from each other
Mm.
because this world does have financial realities and material
Hmm.
realities, and at the same time, as you have said, that stuff isn't what gives you fulfillment.
Yeah. When I first left the corporate world and first got into coaching, I had this idea that somehow I was going to make an impact on at the meta level of those systems. And as time went on, I began to realize that while I may or may not have a meta impact, that's become less important. And what's more important for me is focusing on the individuals and recognizing that everyone is suffering, even those people in power. And that if those people in power weren't suffering so much, even if it's hard to visualize that suffering on the outside, that suffering of what I would call almost spiritual disconnect, and that doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to, you can use whatever words you want. It just means not having a connection to something greater than yourself that's within you. That if those people in power weren't suffering so much, people who are not in power would not be suffering so much. So, is there a way forward to bridge those gaps? Maybe, but I feel like that may be just beyond my pay grade at this point of my evolution. More important to me is how do I find and work with people who are ripe and ready to start to work on themselves and to look at what is the cause of their suffering. That feels more important to me than trying to, and maybe more realistic than trying to work on the system itself. Does that resonate?
It does. I actually love that you've alluded to something I talk about a lot, which is the as above, so below concept.
Uh,
I really do feel like that in this case, as below would be the individual, as above that meta, the broader society. And I do believe that the broader societal healing starts with the individual. That society is a reflection of what is going on at the individual level, just in aggregate, many individuals forming this thing.
yeah, that feels really right for me. One of my mentors, Ram Dass, said over and over in his teachings that the only gift we have to give to another is the work we do on ourselves. And recognizing that that's the case, whether we are a person of tremendous political power or corporate power or just wealth or a person with none of those things, that the only thing we can really do for the world is to work on ourselves, and that that's the gift we really have to offer. So yeah, just going back, I think it feels important to say that I'm more focused on the people who are ripe and ready. Like there was a point before 2018, before my TBI, and before I wouldn't have been ready to hear this. I wasn't, wasn't my time, and so that's okay. Those people are going to continue to go on their path, and one day may not even be during this lifetime, but one day their their opportunity will come for them to want to open their hearts and their minds, and that's when they'll look to um, for help, and not because that help is the answer, because the answer is within them. But we can certainly act as guideposts for each other, holding lights, holding lanterns. Yeah.
That's a perfect segue into asking, what is it that you do as a coach? Because a lot of people listening to this, they'll think, well, I can go to a psychedelic therapist, I can go to an integration coach, I could go to this or that.
Mm,
So when specifically would somebody go to you as a coach, as an integration coach?
yeah. Well, the simplest way to put it, and I want to credit one of my mentors named Marissa Gagliardi with this phrase of saying that we really help people get the most out of their psychedelic experiences. And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I've worked with people who are in the throes of drug and alcohol addiction and are approaching psychedelics in order to begin to help themselves heal from those core wounds that led them to drug and alcohol addiction. I've worked with people who are facing any number of different circumstances, the reasons why they show up to do this kind of work into psychedelics. But the underlying reason seems to be the same, or the underlying gift that a coach, a trained integration coach, can offer is to help them get the most out of those experiences by helping them to prepare for the experience, really getting clear on why are they there, what's led them to this path, what are their intentions for their psychedelic experience, what may be their expectations, which are very different than intentions. An expectation is kind of telling the world, this is what I want. And if I don't get it, I'm going to be somehow upset. And so identifying what those expectations might be, understanding skills on how to really navigate the experience of being under psychedelics. So, how do we actually work with the medicine? How do we be an active participant with the medicine? And that can vary depending on the type of medicine and things like that that people are approaching. And then when the experience is over, when their psychedelic experience is over, they're over, really helping them to land safely, helping them kind of to land back in this reality safely and start to have a plan for um, documenting what happened and starting to just capture what they've learned and then putting a plan in place to take what they were shown or what they learned in their journey and put it into embodied action, put it into real steps that will help them to change their life for the better, or at least in the way that they interpreted from their experience. Another one of my mentors says that, right after a journey, all this knowledge that we have, it's only that. It's not wisdom until we put it into action, until we actually embody it. And so having someone who can help you stay accountable through the process of really unpacking all of the knowledge and then putting steps in place to turn that knowledge into embodied wisdom is really an invaluable resource. Yeah, I'll pause there. How does that land?
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. I love that. I want to go back to a phrase that you mentioned earlier and see, I'll say my understanding of it and see if this resonates with you. It's the phrase, you have the answers within you. Now, for me, the way that I understand this and the way that I talk to people about what I do in coaching is that it's like a mountaineering guide. A
Mm.
mountaineering guide isn't going to, they're not going to move your legs for you and
Hmm.
puppeteer you up the mountain. You got to walk, and you're the only one who can walk. But the guide knows, they know the pitfalls. They can detect, they can check the weather. So that's how I see it. It's like they just have experience walking this path. How do you view that phrase? It's as somebody that believes the answers are within somebody, but also offers that layer of accountability and assistance.
Yeah, I'm just sitting with that description of the mountaineering guide.
Mm.
I like that for a number of reasons. As you mentioned, the mountaineering guide isn't going to move your foot. They're not going to haul your pack. They're not going to make you do anything, but they will certainly warn you of the pitfalls. They will certainly discuss with you the route, and they'll help you understand the best way to get there, or maybe at least what to avoid. They're going to be there to push you gently or sometimes more when needed to help you stay accountable. And they're there as a harm reduction specialist, which feels really important in integrity to me,
Mm.
to act in that manner of a harm reduction specialist. So yeah, that really resonates. I like that.
Yeah. That's a beautiful segue into talking about harm reduction. So, what are some of the realities of the psychedelic space that you talk to people about if they're saying, like, hey, I don't know if this is for me? Let's say I'm not sure what's going to happen in the experience. What kind of advice do you give them?
Yeah. Well, to a question like, I'm not sure this is for me, I would say that's great and that's okay. And maybe it's not, and that's all right. These experiences aren't for everybody, or at least for everybody at certain points on their journey. There are certain, I'm not, in full disclaimer, I'm not a medical provider. I'm not I'm not a physician. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like that. But there are certain, for example, there are certain drug contraindications for psychedelics that people need to be aware of. There are certain things that at certain points of their life, people may not be medically ready for these experiences or psychologically ready. And we always advise that people be in communication with their healthcare professionals, whether it's mental health or physical healthcare providers, just to make sure that they're in a ready state to go through these experiences. Um, Beyond that, for me, it feels like it's a calling. If you're being called by these experiences, then there's probably a good reason for it. And that starting to listen to that inner voice of being called and taking all the precautions ahead to make sure that this is the right time and the right medicine, and I'm physically and mentally prepared, emotionally prepared. Those all feel like really normal and rational things. In fact, I think we often, I'm not sure that if we often, we could run the risk of rushing into something without being aware of everything that could happen. And that's something that we definitely don't want to do. It's our responsibility as coaches to help people make sure that they're doing that due diligence ahead of time. I'll pause there. How does that land?
Yeah. It lands well. I actually love what you said about calling because that addresses the potential issue of jumping on a trend, which I do
Yeah.
believe that the medicine space is actually popular enough that it is a trend in some areas. So I agree. Yeah, it's very much something internal that everyone has to decide. Now, I'd love to talk about another aspect of this plant medicine space, which is very near and dear to me, and that's the aspect of community.
Hmm.
People people have the experience and suddenly, they go home and oh no, I've just had a life-altering experience and I don't have anyone to talk to. Nobody understands. I think I'm crazy because now I'm talking about all this out there stuff in my journey. What was your experience with community following your experiences and how do you help clients to, how do you help them to kind of stay connected with community and not feel alone in what they've just gone through?
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, our healing journey is in so many ways our own and it's so individual. And yet, to go through some of these big healing experiences with community, whether that's physically with community during a ceremony where there's multiple people in a ceremony at a time, or there's support groups, but it's such an important part of this process. I think because so many of us, walk around with presenting ourselves as these characters that we've created. Kind of like on social media, everything's perfect. And but we're not perfect. And we have a lot of baggage and we have issues and we have fears and we have idiosyncrasies and neuroses. And it's so easy to think sometimes that we're alone in that, or that we're alone in feeling separate, or that we're alone in feeling like, what is wrong with me? And so to be able to have an experience which allows other people to be vulnerable, deeply and courageously vulnerable about the challenges they're experiencing, about their traumas, about their core wounds, about why they here, why they're here doing this work. For me, it always helped me to feel not so alone in my suffering and my struggle, and start to see the universality of suffering and of struggle. And also just going back to the point, some of the talking points we had earlier around my concussion and some of that, but that the struggling is a necessary part of our awakening. And being in community, being in support is so profound for that. It's hard to describe just how freeing it is to know that you're not alone. And yeah, I think I'll pause there for a second. What lands with you about that?
Hmm. It recalls many experiences that I've had. And from what I've seen, people that connect with community and that talk about these experiences and that do integration, they have so much better outcomes than if somebody just goes home and disconnects. And I have a lot of empathy for people that do go home and disconnect because I think that sometimes it's hard to find those support networks. So that's one of
Uh,
the things like with this podcast, even just bringing people in to talk about this stuff and helping people see, hey, I'm not alone. There's actually lots of people that are working in this space. There's lots of people that provide support, people that provide community connections. And it's something that helped me a lot. So I love it. I feel
mm,
it's giving back to that community.
yeah, I'm glad that you're doing this. And people need to know that they're not alone. And that's such a powerful recognition and awareness that they're not alone. And we all come to that understanding under different circumstances and
Mm.
through being spoken different, maybe different love languages, we'll call it. And so I really hope for you and your podcast and your community that you're the people that you need to reach and need to know that they're not alone will hear. I'm sure they will.
Thank you. So speaking of people that we're reaching, you mentioned elaborating on what high performer means. So could you give
Mm,
a definition of that?
yeah. When I first was just crafting my coaching practice and really trying to identify my target market, I thought it was just leaders, people with a big title, maybe someone in the C suite or with a VP role or some title that sounded really important. But as I worked with more clients and really listened to myself and put my ego out of the way, more and more of my ego out of the way, I realized that it's not about the title, it's about a mindset of this really heavy external validation seeker, this person that is really trying to quench something externally with something that's only available inside. And so that high performer is someone who is checking off all the boxes. They're growing in their career. Maybe they have a lot of education. Maybe they have a lot of credentials. I think back, I have a I have a master's degree. At one point, I had several sets of letters behind my name, and I always wanted more, and I was just chasing more and more. In a lot of ways, I framed this idea of a high performer on the person that I was. I had risen through the ranks of my career very quickly, probably a little too quickly. I had a lot of education, formal and informal. I had a lot of credentials. I was making some money, but it was still not enough, and I still felt like I needed more, and I needed more people to see me and to validate me somehow. And so there's a lot especially in some specific career fields in corporate America. I don't think it's really just America, but that we're really giving so much of ourselves to our work and are defining ourselves and our worth by our paycheck, our title, our exposure, who's seeing us and who knows what we're doing, by the number of people that report to us, or any number of other factors. And so it's more about that person who's continuing to chase uh, and is starting to maybe burn out and realize, or has burned out, or has begun to realize that something's just wrong and that I'm not going to get what I want by continuing to do this. I'll pause for a second. How does that land?
It lands well. It's a world that I haven't really been a part of, so it's really fascinating hearing you give that perspective. And I imagine hearing this that people in this world may experience some kind of fear if they're looking at doing this transformational work. Fear that, let's say, oh, this is going to ruin my career. Oh, I'm not going to make enough money after I make this change. What if people are going to think I'm crazy and my network is going to disconnect. Do you find any fears like that popping up? And if they do, how do you address that?
Yeah. Well, fear plays a very big and tremendously important role in the work of not just psychedelic integration, but transformational. work altogether,
Mm.
because our fears are really not meant to be stop signs. They're meant to be compasses pointing to where we have inner work to do. And let's take the someone who's approaching psychedelics, for example. There are some very real fears around working with psychedelics. There's a legal landscape in the United States that is still very much averse and can be very punitive for people that are seeking to grow and heal using these medicines. That's a real fear and something that needs to um, be understood and dealt with. There's a fear that I'm not going to be the same after a big experience like this, especially when I've built my entire identity around something that the ego will become very fearful and very protective of anything that it thinks could threaten that these survival techniques that we've created that are really how our ego expresses itself. And when these fears come up, especially around this idea of I'm not going to be the same, I often would say something like, well, you're right, you won't be the same. And that's kind of the point. This is the point of this is to be shaken in such a way that we begin to see old patterns and old behaviors that are no longer serving us so we can start to look at those. And that's not always an easy thing. Fear is such a big part of this process. I'd love to hear from you how it shows up for you in your work. How has fear maybe even affected you and even helped you on your own healing path, Daniel?
That's an excellent question. Flipping it around. So for me, there was a fear of very existential fears for me, I would say. I had pretty deep depression for a long time, and there was a fear that that would just be a fixture of my life, that it would just be dissatisfying. And what I learned through the course of my own work with plant medicines was that there were some very negative assumptions, shall we say, about life that were leading to this depression in my case. And a
Mm,
lot of black and white thinking, especially thinking that certain relationships were antagonistic. So let's say like my relationship to society, even romantic relationships, relationships to certain authority figures. And I had to really, look at what assumptions I was making about people and about life. So yeah, one of the things that I didn't, and this can be very challenging, and this is what I love about the psychedelic experience is that it lets you take kind of a bird's eye view, almost like you're, you're looking at your own life like you're reading a storybook, like you're looking at
mhm.
someone else's. And when you're able to detach in that space, you can really see things that maybe are harder to see before. Like in my case, a very subconscious fear was people are out to hurt me. They're only out for them. They're only there for themselves. They just, they're trying to take from me and they don't care to give back. And that was not something that I explicitly believed, but it was a very deep subconscious belief that I held for a long, long time. And that was one of the biggest causes of my severe depression. It caused me to it caused me to not engage with life because I had, my subconscious fear was, oh, well, it's not worth engaging with people because they don't care about me, so why bother? That was sort of the mindset. So that was probably the number one fear I would say that I had to work through in the course of plant medicine work, and a lot of that was, beautiful lessons on trust. So I worked with ayahuasca first, which and I'm sure you talk with your clients about all the different medicine experiences, what that can entail. Ayahuasca can shut your body down. What I mean by that is that it can paralyze you so you can't move. It can cause you to pee your pants. I call it the rite of passage in the ayahuasca space. But yeah, I mean, I've had people take care of me through stuff like that. You know, when I literally could not move or even control my bodily functions, I had to completely trust people because I couldn't, literally could not help myself. And so those are some beautiful experiences of people showing, hey, you know, people do care. The universe is not a giant dog eats dog competition. People actually do help each other. So that was lovely, and I actually think that would I don't know because I haven't been in, say, a C-suite. I'm just that's not really my world, but I imagine that people in that space, that it's nice, you know, to hear that the world is not just a competition.
Yeah. I'm curious. What's interesting is as I hear you speak about your own experience, is that fear that you had, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but confronting that fear maybe in a very different way than you would have expected by having to have people take care of you, having to be reliant on other people. That same fear was also part of the pathway to your own healing. It's like we have to go back through that, through that fear, through those wounds in order to heal them. Does that resonate with you?
It does, yeah. So this is Chris giving a little showcase
Ah,
coaching. Yeah, I'm joking with you.
ah,
Um, I'm trying to think. So where the fear did help me, or where it pointed, I should say, rephrase that, where it pointed the path for me. I was very resistant to anything external as far. So we're plant med and that led me to plant medicines because plant medicine's the core of it is that you have an experience, a direct experience that
ah,
will, you know, impart a lesson or tell you something about yourself. So the fear pointed me to plant medicine, saying like I don't want to have anyone telling me, you know, how to deal with this. I want to have some direct experience. And in that
ah,
sense, it was very beneficial. And it was also something, despite it being beneficial in that way, it was also something that I had to let go of eventually. So I'll add that too, that sometimes yes, you know, your fears are absolutely a compass, and it's also not something that you need to continuously hold on to. It can point the way, and you say, okay, thank you, fear. I thank you for how you have served me in the past, and you no longer serve me. I would like to let you go now. Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. Your words remind me of just another common thing that people bring to me especially before their plant medicine experience, especially new people or people maybe they did mushrooms or something in college, but they've never used psychedelics consciously with intention. But there's just a fear, and then there's almost this fear of the fear. And I would say to anyone who is approaching a plant medicine journey and they have some fear and trepidation, that I think that's a healthy sign that they're
Mhm.
taking this seriously, that they recognize that this is a profound thing. This is something that is meant to be treated with the utmost amount of care and respect. And I tell people I would be more worried if they didn't have any fear. They didn't have any anxieties or any trepidations going into these experiences, because it would point to me that maybe they weren't quite ready and that they didn't understand fully what they were walking into, or weren't approaching it with enough maturity or respect. So there's for me, a really healthy amount of fear walking into these experiences, and that I'm grateful to see in people. And just like the Joseph Campbell sort of story, that cave we fear to enter holds the treasure that we seek. And so there's so much to be said about sitting with that fear, understanding what it's here to teach us, so that we can complete the lessons from that fear and really embody those teachings.
Mhm. I'll give another angle to that, which is that in my case, there wasn't a ton of fear, but there was respect. So that was how I approached it. I wouldn't say that I was anxious coming into it, but I did have a profound respect for the space, for you know what people were trying to do, and that made all the difference. And trust.
Mm.
trust was and that was a very important one, and it was interesting. Like so I'm unusual. Ayahuasca was my first experience with anything even remotely psychedelic. I never even smoked a joint before sitting with ayahuasca in my 20s. So, this is one of the most intense psychedelic experiences, and that's my first. So for me, trust was really important. So when I'm sitting there purging and, I'm just having all this crazy visuals and my whole perception of reality is suddenly flipped upside down. That trust kept me from unraveling, frankly, just trusting that, okay. Actually, one of the phrases that I use in a medicine journey frequently is the sun will rise. The sun will rise. Every journey, no matter how intense, no matter how earth-shattering, consciousness-altering, I always wake up in the morning, the sun is up, and I'm okay every single time. And
Hmm.
so that phrase helps a lot. Another phrase that I'd love to give to is that I have all the energy I need. That one was given to
Mm.
me by ayahuasca when I was sitting in a ceremony, super hungry, barely able to move, just begging for some sustenance so that I could get through the day. And that actually has a lot of parallels to, my own journey. And I think people, experiences that other people might have had of just feeling tired. And ayahuasca just said, nope, you have all the energy you need. Power through it. And sure enough, I woke up the next day. I got out of bed, I took a walk, and I ate breakfast. I was okay. Mm,
I have all the energy I need. Yeah, I
yeah.
love that.
Mm. I love that you brought up Joseph Campbell, and I'll try not to go on a whole tangent with Joseph Campbell because I love his work. I read Hero with a Thousand Faces. I'm well familiar with the hero's journey arc, but somebody used a similar analogy with me that you used about entering the cave. And he said to me when I had a particularly intense ayahuasca journey that what you have done is, you've battled the dragon. You've fought those things, and you fought yourself, basically. You fought your own dragons. And he also mentioned that that's where the treasure lies, which I agree. You've alluded to this too, the immense transformative potential of these journeys, and they can be so, so hard sometimes. I actually think that not just the journeys themselves, like the altered state, but the integration afterwards, I feel like is one of the
Hmm.
hardest things. When you suddenly are out of the beautiful, curated medicine space, and now you have to contend with life as you know it, but with the twist, everything's changed. Uh-oh. What do I
Yeah,
do? Yeah. But that to me is the importance of integration work. And I hope that people do, I hope that as many people as possible do take that seriously. Because one warning that I will give, and this is not to instill fear, it's just to be real. If you do not integrate, and integrating can look different for different people, but if you do not integrate your experience, you just continue to relive old patterns, then you can absolutely experience basically no change in your life. That is entirely possible. Your journey then becomes basically like watching a cool movie. At that point, it's
hmm,
like, oh, that was interesting. There were some pretty colors and shapes. So yeah, I really pay attention to that integration. It's important.
I agree. It feels so foundational that we who have had undergone these psychedelic experiences and have had powerful transformations speak to the power of the integration
Mm,
experience. I say with my clients that the medicine isn't in the cup or the whatever. It's not in the. In other words, the medicine isn't just the psychedelic compound or chemical that's being ingested. It's the work you've done to prepare. It's the all of the preparation that maybe whether it's a diet or whether it's just the journaling and the getting clear on intentions. It's afterwards making being intentional about putting these lessons into place. That you're so right that without integration and integration support, I love what you said about it. It's just like going to see a great movie. You really lose. Um, most of the real most of the real gifts that the journey and the experience has to offer you. One something that's come to me recently, a great way to explain this is that psychedelic journeys plant seeds. They give us seeds for growth and transformation. The work that we do as psychedelic integration coaches is to help prepare the soil for those seeds, and then to plant them, and then to tend them, to water them so that they really grow and flourish. Without which, if you scatter a handful of seeds, one or two might take root, but most of them will simply die. And this idea that we prepare the soil, plant them properly, raise them with love and care, and tend to them so that they really take fruit. That really speaks to me right now in the way that I approach my work and the way that I see the power of the integration work.
I think that is a beautiful metaphor to leave off on. So, Kris, thank you very much for being here. And I'd like to ask, is there any place that people can reach you?
Yeah, so my website is fullheartproject.com, fullheartproject.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm not on Instagram yet. Maybe I need to be. People keep harassing me, telling me I should. But fullheartproject.com is by far and away the best and easiest place to reach me.
Wonderful. And I will leave links in the description for Kris's LinkedIn as well as his website if you would like to reach him. Thank you very much. This has been a lovely conversation. And with that, I will make that a wrap.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yep, thanks, Kris.